Yeah, I remember the last time I was here. I remember the very quick segue right into the work. I was waiting for this big drawn out sort of announcement and about but hey, I felt comfortable in here kicking. Thank you so much for welcoming me here, making me smile, making me laugh, and of course sharing your Alcoholics Anonymous circumstances with us here. My friend Robert, and we've been doing this Zoom thing together for a while now, and very glad to see you and all you folks who I've never met before. Thanks for being here. I'm glad you're here in search of some sort of information or some sort of thing to tickle your own sobriety. I'm sure you have better things you can be doing. I don't know what time it is everywhere else, but it's 2:00 p.m. on a Friday afternoon here in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And I am currently happy, joyous, and free. I have been sober since July the 16th, 1987. I love Alcoholics Anonymous with all of my heart. Anytime that I get an opportunity to get a mic like this, I like to make sure that that's the message, if nothing else, that comes across is how much I love AA, and I really do. And then guys asked me to sort of do this stuff, and I think it was you, Steve, that originally asked me to do this. I'm not sure. And then a couple of days later, a couple of weeks later, says, "Well, what do you want to talk about?" And I don't know what. Oh, steps 2 and 10. Trust me, there was no method to the madness. There was no method to the madness. I just snatched a couple numbers out of the air. But I have come to what I was thinking about pulling up to it this morning. I thought, what am I going to talk about? And here's the sort of concise version of what's going on here is that I love and live in step 10. It drives everything in my life today. I believe that all the answers and all the to successful living exist in the practice of step 10. I believe that, and I'll come to that in a little while. But step 2 still remains a mystery to me. And I think it excites me. It excites me to sort of participate in especially like this, where there's going to be a little bit of sharing afterwards, to participate in some sort of conversations around step 2. It's the thing that sort of changed everything in Alcoholics Anonymous, like everything from the Oxford group into Alcoholics Anonymous came about as a result of this second step. This is not favorable to members of the Oxford group to kind of think this way. But we'll talk about that in a second. I think it's really important to understand I'm alcoholic. I'm alcoholic because I can't stop when I start, and I can't stop starting. But the powerlessness that exists in me happens in between drinks. Like without alcohol, I am not okay. And so I go back. I took my first drink at 12 and had this incredible experience, this drinking experience where for 10 or 15 minutes, I felt absolutely elevated to a position of normal. I felt brought up to a level of absolute normalcy. I believe all of you guys felt this way, and it just took me a couple of drinks to get there at 12. And I shot for that for the rest of my drinking. I shot for that for the rest of my drinking. That night, that 12-year-old drunk I was so sick, and I got up the next day knowing full well I was going to do that again. And then within a short period of time, at 15 years old, I'm swearing off it. I mean, I couldn't pull it off. I needed to stop at 15. I was bleeding out orifices in my body that I shouldn't be, and it was not good. I was so sick from alcohol use, and I screamed out, "I'm not going to do this anymore." And later that afternoon, I was drinking. And I couldn't even remember, not even with sufficient force. I didn't give a damn. My apathy began to creep in to justify how I could do all this damage in my life to myself and to the people around me that love me. At 17 years old, I was in a jail cell, and that's where I first met you guys. Now, you didn't bring me any hope or anything like that. You brought me a great deal of confusion, but I wasn't looking for help. You just showed up and started telling me your AA story, and I thought, oh my God, why would you ever stop drinking? You guys need to drink more, not less. Like the way these old guys were explaining to me was like, buddy, I hope I die before I ever get to what you're talking about, And at 19 years old, I was in a federal penitentiary, and for the next 4.5 years, you guys came. You guys came to me. I never came to the doors of AA. If Steve had asked me to come down there and do this live, I would have done it, because my experience is I didn't come to the doors of AA. You guys kept coming to me. And so I will take these obligations very, very seriously. And any opportunity that I have to share this with somebody in need, I'll do it, because you just kept coming to me. Now, what happened to me on July the 16th, 1987, as a result of a whole series of circumstances you can hear on recordings, other places, I was brought to my knees in a jail cell. the futility and frustration of living the way I had lived. It had been a long time since I wanted to live. I wanted to die for the most part. And anytime that I wasn't drinking, suicidality and death and other people's death that was always on my mind. I was violent, and that was in between drinks. When I took a drink or two, I began to feel okay. It brought me up to okayness again, normalcy. So alcohol had always been my solution. And everybody saw what alcohol did to me, but nobody saw what it was doing for me, nor could I express it to anybody except you guys. It's only you guys that understand still to this day when I talk about my story, and they go, "Oh my God, you talk to Joe Normal there." And he said, why didn't you stop then? Why, your mom, really, you did that to, what the bank robbery? Why didn't you stop? It's like, when I didn't have any of these answers, I would say, I don't know. Powerlessness was my issue. It was the only issue. It remains today the only issue in Alcoholics Anonymous for me. Powerlessness. Step one, powerlessness. It's the only issue there is. I either am or I'm not. There is no other place to land on that. I'm not sometimes powerless, although when I was drinking, that's exactly how I looked. But today, I have to understand and acknowledge and accept and concede to my innermost self that I'm powerless. That's the only issue in AA. That's why that's such a strong point where we talk about having had a powerful first step experience, which should drive us into the rest of the work. And the part of the next piece to step one is actually the segue into what I want to talk about. I'm powerless over alcohol, drinking bad, But this thing about my life being unmanageable, if I don't have a powerful first step experience, I don't understand that the point is my life is unmanageable by me. I can no longer be the manager of my life. It's unmanageable by me. Therefore, that understanding or conception being internalized drives me into this second step. And then the second step confirms that the first step was true. You see what I'm saying? And so if you don't have a powerful, if it's a rudimentary exercise, or us big bookers here, we try to get people into the work and into the steps, and we're so happy when they concede, and we're so happy when we get them in. But sometimes it's really important to stop here because it looks a lot like they want to stop, but inside there's other things going on. And there has to be this dejection, this absolute first step experience to drive it into this second step, because the proposition offered in the second step is not for the meek. It is not for the meek. How do I know this stuff? Well, because I was a two-stepper for 14 years. If you don't know what that is, Google it and look it up in your literature. Two-stepping is when you don't drink and you help people. So in an Alcoholics Anonymous environment that I was in, kicking here in Hamilton, we got tons of people, members, so big groups and all that kind of stuff. A lot of Alcoholics Anonymous members, but nobody was talking about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and nobody was taking the steps. Or nobody was reading the book. So let me rephrase it, because I don't want to say nobody was talking about the 12 steps, because we were all talking about it. That was a very common thing. I belonged to a 12 and 12 group for the whole 14 years I was sober, where we read the 12 and 12 and we talked about the steps. And I got to tell you, those steps are magnificent to talk about. And on the other side of each one of the steps, on the other side of reading it, discussing it with all you guys, I would look for incidents or moments in my life where I felt akin to those experiences that you were talking about and assume I had taken the step. Talking about the step and taking the step are two completely different things. So we would read, and there's nothing about the steps I didn't know when I had my experience. But there's a couple of people on here. Robert knows what happened to me was I was asked to speak a lot. I'm a two-stepper with a big mouth, and I'm young and I'm vibrant and I love them, scrappy, and I chase women in AA, and I do everything wrong in AA is to do, but God damn it, I've loved AA from the moment I've come here, and so I get asked to speak a lot. So over a little bit of time, my life begins to change, and the things that start happening in my life begin to change with me, and I begin to have this sort of reconciliation with this power, this God. So I'm talking a lot about God, and I'm reading in your steps, and I'm reading a lot of literature. I'm looking in books, and I'm doing stuff with other guys, native sweats and ceremonies and all kinds of spiritual exercises, and reading Og Mandino, and I'm a goddamn guru. This mental case who lived this life is now this sainted individual that, you know, and meanwhile inside I'm still chasing chicks, still robbing, lying, and stealing. I realized that my problem wasn't that I did these things in my life, sober or drunk. My problem was that I got caught. And you see, 14 years of sobriety offers a lot of safety around the fact that I'm aware of what I'm doing and stuff around me. And the fact of the matter is you old guys, the old guys in the AAs, none of you are here. Actually, I'm probably one of the oldest, eh, Robert, you and me, buddy. All the old guys in AA would say, hey, did you drink today? And I'd say, no. Well, then it was a good day. And I bought that shit. You, Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole in 1986, 87, 88, 89 endorsed my behaviors by saying, at least you didn't drink today. Folks, I'm here to tell you that I'm powerless and I'm insane. And there were times where I probably should have drank and it might have saved me a great deal of difficulty because what was going on inside of me was reckless and it was terrible. Back to where I was at 14 years of sobriety. I'm being asked to speak at all these meetings on the Sunday morning closing on the spiritual elements of Alcoholics Anonymous because I know the steps. And I try to be funny, and I have people laughing, and I have people crying from my own personal disclosure, and that's that's the speaker I am. And you leave the conference filled up with some hope because this madman became this person that's in front of you at 14 years sober. That's how it was working. I'm outside having a cigarette with the main banquet speaker, and he looks at me straight in the eyes, and after I'd talked to him about AA for a while, he says, you know, you're asleep dreaming, you're awake. And I said, pardon? He said, you're asleep dreaming, you're awake. I said, hold on for a second here, buddy. I just been telling you what a great AA member I am. I just been telling you that I run this shit in Canada. I run AA in Canada. Like, you didn't hear me? And he said, I can tell there's an experience in AA you've never had. And I said, oh yeah, buddy? What's that? And he said, the 12 steps. You've never taken the steps. I was insulted. I'm 14 years sober. And I said that. I'm 14 years sober. How could I have not taken the steps? And he said, there's many that don't. But it says, here are the steps we took. Not here are the steps we read about, talked about, chanted about, held hands, but here are the steps we took. And he said, and I can help you with that right now if you want. And I said, well, that's blasphemy. He said, you know, it takes a lifetime to do. And he said, come on up to my room with me. And I followed him up to his room, qualified me as an alcoholic for the first time. And this was the first time I had ever heard anything about the second step of Alcoholics Anonymous from our big book literature. I knew everything there was about putting intellect before humility before intellect. I knew those were my cute little quips when I would talk about step 2 at meetings right out of the 12 and 12, but I had no idea about taking that step. After he qualified me as an alcoholic, he said he knew, and I knew. I've always known I'm alcoholic, and I didn't have to convince him of that. He knew I conceded in his presence. And he said, tell me about this God in your life. And this is where we enter into the second step. It says, my life's unmanageable by me. Once I concede to that, which I hadn't, but I did that day, I am now ready to take a second step. But until I make that concession that my life's unmanageable by me, if I just say my life's unmanageable, I'm talking to you about going to jail and all the people I hurt and hurt my mom. And I'm talking about all those incidents in my life that look like my life's unmanageable by me. But the moment that I concede to the fact that it is unmanageable by me, not just unmanageable, but by me, I'm ready to move into the second step. And he said, do you believe in God? And I said, I do. But I'd never felt that God believed in me. And God was a Bush League pinch hitter, the way it's described in the 12 and 12 in step 7. That's how I saw God. Every time I got into trouble, I blamed God. And every time I got out of trouble, I took credit for it. That's how my life existed every single time. You know, when I was talking about getting caught, if I got caught, it was God's fault. If I got out of trouble from being caught, I was a genius. And I was right soon to return to whatever nefarious behavior it was again. I mean, this is egocentricity running large through me, which is the basis of my talk today. So he said, my proclamation, or the understanding of the second step that I need to incorporate into my heart, my chest, and my mind, and into my spirit, was not based on do I now believe or I'm even willing to believe. I was raised a Catholic and stuff. I knew there was a God. That's my understanding. But he just didn't believe God had any interest in me. And he said, your proposition is a little later on in our literature. It's talking here, and he shows it to me, and he says, crushed by a self-imposed Christ, we had to ask ourselves, God is either everything or else he's nothing. God either is or he isn't. What's your choice to be? Now, he showed this to me later, but he said that out loud. And where are you getting this shit from? And he goes, the big book. And I'm going, that blue book in AA, I've had one of those for years, man. That's in there. Yeah, I'd never read it. I read all the stories in the back. I'd never read 14 years. I'd never read that stuff. Never read that stuff. I was a young, hip, slicking dude. I didn't, that was, or for the ancient guys, that big book thing. 12 and 12 is much more refreshing. It was much more up to speed, you know? And so the bottom line is there were no instructions in the 12 and 12. So there's nothing for me to do in there except, I don't know, talk, talk at meetings. And so he says this, he says, God either is or he isn't. What's your choice to be? And guys, I'm already drawn into a emotionalism that I had never felt before. I've been with the guy for 15 minutes in a hotel room, and I'm already brought into a place of absolute surrender that had never happened. And I'm talking about absolute surrender, not those moments of, aren't I grateful to be here in this place? I'm talking about, of myself, I am nothing. I must have this. Exactly like if you know your book and you go with Bill's story, you know, when Ebby was standing there at the door and he said, well, how are you, old friend? He said, I'm licked this time. It's on page 13. Bill's describing his experience in the bed. And he says, I offer myself to God as I then understood him, which is step 3. And he said, I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself, I was nothing, that without him, I was lost. And so I'm sitting with this man and I said, I must have this thing. And I don't know Bill's experience. I hadn't read the book. I said, I must have this thing. If there's something there, I must have it. And I said, God has to be everything. And so he said, you know, buddy, you're making amazing progress. We're 20 minutes in here. And he said, I want to talk to you a little bit about your life run on self. So we talked about my selfishness and self-centeredness, and some of those nefarious activities came into the mix sober. And he said, buddy, I've been there. The chasing the women, the inability to quit smoking cigarettes, you know, the gambling, the being drawn to sort of the old gangs and the old way of life. You know, those things have all been on me in my sobriety too. But he said, what we're talking about here is this. And he talked about God being the father and me being the child, and God being the principal and me being the agent, and God being the director and me being the actor. He started talking about that role, and he was talking about it without a book. And I sat there and I said, again, where are you getting this stuff? And he told me, and he opened up his book then and says, 60 to 63 will be the most important things you've ever put your eyes on in your life. And he has not been wrong. This is many years later. He has not been wrong. And then he said, would you say a prayer with me, man? I said, well, I'm not much of a praying guy, but he was already moving the coffee table out of the way. You know, he wasn't really asking me. And, but you know, he was moving the coffee table out of the way, and I got down on my knees and he draped his arms over mine. And I'm a big guy, and he was 6'5", and he was a big man and big hulking guy. He had silver hair with a silver beard and a beautiful smile and wonderful eyes. And he draped himself over top of me and he said, God, I offer myself to thee. And I said, God, I offer myself to, what was it again? Thee. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me as thou wilt, to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Is that even a word? Wilt. He said, just repeat after me. So I'm saying this prayer. And by the time I got to the end, take away my difficulties, I began to have this huge amount of emotionalism rise up in my chest. It's the only way I can describe it. And it was as if it got jammed up into a bubble in my throat. And I just went and started crying. It was like a cat. You know, when a cat coughs up a hairball, it was like that. I got coughed up something. And I collapsed underneath the weight of his arms, and he just held me. And I stood up and I said, I don't know what just happened, but he said, you've never taken the steps before. He said, now there's work to be done. He put me in a grudge list, and in the 4th step, my life has gone to where it is today. This is Mark Houston. And that was 15, 20 minutes in a hotel room. And I don't want to ever take away the understanding that I have that these miracles abound, and they miracles abound like this. Everywhere in here, anything important that happens suddenly. It never happens over a great deal of time. It happens suddenly. Everything good happens suddenly. Everything profound and magical and powerful happens suddenly. And 14, some people say to me, how long does it take to have a true spiritual experience? I say, I don't know, 14 years in one day. I don't know. You know, that's what I know. That's my experience. You know, you can have it like 30 minutes after you get sober. I don't know. But for me, it's 14 years in a day. And my life began in Alcoholics Anonymous after 14 years, having never taken the steps, being a 2-stepper. Don't drink and help people. Look it up. That's how a lot of people are staying sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. Don't drink at a service position, and some people just do that. It's called service-based sobriety, and it's a very heavy part of the triangle that eventually just collapses on top of the recovery and crushes it. It's like, you can see it happen sometimes. But the bottom line is I get engaged in this process with this man. I begin to have an experience that God is either everything or else he is nothing. What is my choice? Now I'm looking at life through a different lens. Now I'm looking at life through, and this is honest to God, the simplicity of my mind never fails to serve me well. I could get into the complexities of this all I like. But what happened in my mind was, what would God have me do? As I began to enter into each day, what would God have me do? And guess what happened? The nefarious lifestyle started to disappear. The robbing, the lying, the cheating, the stealing in sobriety began to disappear. It began to just fall away. What would God have me do? What would God have me do? And that was an end process too, of doing a 4-step inventory, going into step 5 and 6, asking God to take these things away in step 6 and 7. By the time I started knocking on doors a few weeks after I met Mark Houston, these defects of character and shortcomings had not reared their heads. They had not reared their heads. All I was doing was in the midst of following direction. That's it. So that, this second step proposition, the second step way of life, people will talk about have to have a powerful spiritual experience, or a powerful first step experience, in order to sort of open up to the rest of the program. I believe that the second step confirms the truth of the first step. It confirms the truth of the first step, that you're powerless, but it also drives you into this sort of direction where you need this power. And without it, I am lost, as our book says. Without this power, I'm lost. So that takes me to running through this stuff and knocking on doors, right? Knocking on doors in the 9th step. And I've been around here long enough that I had had those experiences where I got in the face of people I had offended in the past and nothing happened. See what I'm saying? So I would go to the club meetings later that day or that week or whatever, and they would be reading on step 9. And I would say, nothing happened. It must be amended. See what I mean? That was my pass. That was my pass, So now I'm knocking on doors, I'm looking people straight in the eyes, and I'm owning my stuff. And I want to start there, because when we talk about step 10, there's an important element that has to sort of be present here. And I don't know if any of you's got your books with you, but let me just go here. It says, so remember in the second step, that I came to believe that a power greater than myself that could restore me to sanity. Then it says here, we will suddenly realize at this place, when we're making amends, we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. It's no longer a theory. It's no longer a theory in the second step. I'm hoping that God can restore me to sanity. In the second step, I'm hoping that some sort of synopsis in my life will be created that brings peace and joy and those kinds of things. It's no longer a theory. It's already happening. This is on the heels of those 9-step promises that are so bastardized at meetings now. They've got them read at every single meeting you go to now, that it's like, I don't even hear them anymore. But when you look at them in our literature and think about how powerful those things are, and remember, when you look at those 9-step promises, there's no self in there. There's nothing that you've done. These things have fallen away. Those are the words that are used. How deeply psychological is that? I'm walking down the road one day and say, hey, I forgot to be pissed off today. It's like, they fall away. These things just fall away. And it's only because I'm directed through the second step and driven into this work that happens. But it goes, this thought brings us to step 10. What thought? That these promises will materialize if we work for them, if we work for them. I had never done any work for these things. And I thought the 10th step, because my first sponsor said, oh, son, the essence of the 10th step isn't saying sorry. It's not doing the things that make it necessary to say sorry. Now, what I heard was, son, and that's my first sponsor in the first 5 years I was sober, and I'm talking about the 10th step at a table. I thought, that's cute. I'm going to repeat that. And that's what I would repeat at conferences. That was my 10th step profound statement I would make at conferences. But what I was really saying was, the essence of the 10th step isn't saying sorry. It's not getting caught doing the things that you do in order to have to say sorry. That's how I was living. I hated saying sorry, but so I made sure I didn't get caught. I didn't do no behavioral changes at all. But it says, if we continue to set right any mistakes, we continue to take personal inventory. This is what we're doing as we're going along to this life. We vigorously commence this way of living. So with effort, I'm going to commence this way of living. As we cleaned up the past. So while I'm engaged in the process of cleaning up the past, I'm going to look at this way of living, this idea that God is God, I am not. This deal that I make in step 3, that's the way of living we're talking about. We've entered the world of the spirit. And how do we know that? Because I can look at some of those promises and say, some of those things have come true. If they're post signs, if there's signs, I can look at those and say, oh my God, those things have happened for me. Like, I don't have to be convinced. I've entered the world of the spirit. I'm living in a spiritual transitional phase of my life. And our next function is to grow in understanding effects. It's not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Continue to, okay, so this word continue is the sort of hook, right? It's all over that this little piece of directions in the 10th step. Continue. So whatever it is you had for lunch yesterday, it's continue. You can't stay fed and nutritioned by the food you ate yesterday or last week or a month ago. I have to continue to do this. And this is the place in my life where I said to you earlier that I believe all the secrets to good living are locked up here in the 10th step. I'll say this at the beginning, and then hopefully I'll wrap it back up at the end, is that I know for a fact that I go through life like this on a beam. I get up in the morning and I enact the disciplines and I get set on a beam. And sometimes I jump off of that beam within 50 seconds, 60 seconds. And sometimes I stay on that beam for quite some time until I seem a worldly clamor knocks me off the beam. Now, the only difference between my sobriety each day is how long it takes me to get back on that beam. I used to say that with the longer I stay sober, the quicker I seem to get back to the beam. That's not true. The stronger I am spiritually connected, the quicker I get back to the beam. And because I'm 36 years sober means shit about how quickly I get back to that beam, because I can be a dick and I can stay a dick for a long time, because you know why? I'm right. There's nothing more gratifying than being right. So an hour before this meeting started, I had a fight with my wife that I'm actually going to have to go up and clean up after this, because I'm shooting off my big gate right now and owning up to this stuff. And this is how we have to live. This is how we have to live. And that's the way it goes. And I'm feeling happy about that, because I know that within about 20 minutes from now, it's going to be all cleaned up. I hope. But here's where we get into the sort of specific directions. It says we watch for these things: selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. So where did we learn to look for those things? We learn to look for those things in step 4. And you guys know all this, but I'm going to go through it anyway in case someone doesn't. And then it says, continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, fear. And when they crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. So where do we learn to do that? We learn to do that in step 6 and 7. Now I got a 4, 6, and 7 program. It says we discuss with somebody immediately. Where did I learn to do that? Step 5. Now I got a 4, 5, 6, and 7 program. And then it says we discuss it with someone immediately and make amends if we've harmed anybody. It's steps 8 and 9. So I got a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 program. Holy shit, right now, like that, when these crop up, I'm going to watch for these things. And when they crop up, this is what I'm going to see, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this stuff. And then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone that we could help. And that's step 12. So I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, way of life, and then direct my attention to someone I can help in 12. And it happens like that. That's how quickly it can happen. Bang, incident, clamor, worldly clamor, some sort of idiocy happens in the world that I just don't understand or can't tolerate. And boom, I go off my beam and I do this, and bang, I get back on the beam. Now that sounds simplified, and it is. That's really kind of what happens, right, Robert? That really is what happens. But let me tell you how it looks in the life of a sober person. How much time do I got? How much time do I got, Stevie? Just hold up your hands. Do I got like 5 minutes? 10 minutes? Beautiful. Good. I might be able to tell two of these stories. Okay. So let's say that that's our step 10 practice, that when something happens, our step says, what does the step actually say? Continue to take personal inventory. That's the inventory. The inventory is watching for these things. And when something crops up, this is what we do. We make amends immediately. That's what our basically 10 steps says. Well, this is what this says. And there's a reason that it keeps us in the game every single moment of every single hour of every single day of every single month of every single, it keeps us in the moment. And this is so important, because everything in our book around step 6 and 7 talks about the now. It's directing us to focus just on the now. What's there now? And here we're talking about we're going to continue to stay in the now. We're going to continue to stay in the now, continue to stay in the now. And we get to this place where these things crop up. So I'm driving to my home group one night on a Thursday night. I love my home group. I love my home group because of the people in it. I love my home group because there's always wet drunks there. And I love meetings with wet drunks that get angry and pissed off and try to hit you. I love that stuff. I'm very excited to go to my Thursday night home meeting. And as I'm going there, I'm driving down the road and I get a phone call. My middle daughter, Sarah's hung herself. And so I'm sitting in my car and I pull the car over and I lose my shit. I start banging on the dash and banging on the steering wheel. I slap the mirror off I'm losing my shit. And out of nowhere comes this idea that says, have we learned nothing? God, you need to take this from me. You need to remove this from me. I'm losing my mind here. Please take this from me. And I put my car in drive and I drove down the rest of the way down the hill. And my workshop partner, Brian, who Robert knows and some other people might know, he's down at the bottom of the hill at my group. He's standing outside. I fall into his arms and I tell him what's happened. He says, what do you want to do? And the drug buggy just pulled up and all the drunks started falling out of it and all that stuff. And I said, well, let's just take a few minutes with these guys. So we went into the meeting and we had about a 45-minute meeting. I sat on my hands. I was very confused about what to do. And I was in the moment. I wasn't like I was following directions. The directions were coming at me. Why? Because I spent so much time with you guys talking about it and exploring it and hearing your experience that I couldn't help it. It came over me like that, where I was just following these directions. And after the meeting, he says, let's go. So we jumped in the car and we went down to the hospital. And I walk in and my wife, Leslie's standing there and she's sobbing. I put my arms around her and I said, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And it's because I knew it was. And I went up to the nurses and the doctors and I thanked them from the bottom of my heart for helping my little girl. She's still alive. She was on life support. And I thanked them for doing everything for her that they could do. She wasn't going to make it. They told me that. It was clear. But I thanked them. That's not who I was in the car when I got the news. That's not how it was going to go if I'd have gone straight to the hospital. And I walk into the ICU and I put my hand underneath Sarah's head and I lift her head up ever so gently and I kiss her on the ear and I whisper, it's going to be okay. Because I knew it was. Because I knew it was. And I became of use to my wife, to the medical team, to my little girl, Sarah, because it wasn't about me like it was in that car. Now, how quickly do we get back to center is the only issue today. And I picked these subject matters to put it out, to explain to people how important it is to recognize this works for everything. Not for some things. It's not like it works for everything except the suicide of your child or anything like that. Now, my daughter lived. Sarah lived. She's not right. She's not okay. She's on the street right now as we speak. She's your favorite. I got 4 daughters. She's your favorite. I was talking to a guy last night who was asking me, how's she doing? And she's everybody's favorite because she's one of us. My other girls aren't. They're just living their own selfish lives. My daughter, Sarah, she's on the street. She's hooking for using money and drinking money. That's what she does. And I love her, and you love her too. And so many of us have had her in your home and had broke bread with her, and you keep your eyes looking out for her. She's a beautiful human being who has been so overtaken by this insidious disease. Now, thank you for listening to that story. The point of the story is getting back on the beam. You fast forward to just before COVID, I get a phone call when I'm at work, and my oldest daughter, Dana, who's a champ. She's just a champ. She's a mother of 2 little girls, has her own business, very successful, multimillionaire. She's a fantastic gal. Selfish and self-centered to the extreme, but I just love her. She's just a fantastic kid. And I get a phone call from her. She had rolled an ATV in a field. They were they were farmers, and they were out in the field, and the ATV went over and she banged her head off of the roll bars a couple of times. And that was on a Thursday, and I went out for dinner on the Sunday, and I saw her, and she was pretty slow and kind of acting with a little stupor. And I said to her, you better go get that checked. You're pretty concussed. I can tell you've got a pretty bad concussion there. So she goes, she gets it checked, and I get this on like early in the week, and I get a phone call while I'm at the office. Now, I'm sitting at my desk in my office. I work in a wide open office with a bunch of people, a team in a medical profession. And we're sitting in this office and I get this phone call and my daughter is sobbing. She's in the truck with her husband, Jamie, who's a beautiful man, but she's running to her daddy. She's not running to her husband. So she takes the phone and she starts sobbing on the phone. And she says, and they found something in my head. They said it's the size of a plum. And she's crying. She's got a brain tumor. And I said, just get here as quick as you can. I hung up the phone, and right away, you son of a and in my mind, I'm going to God. You, after, and this is the ego, after all I do for you, I give you everything I have, everything I am, I give to you. And I'm enraged for about 20 seconds at my desk. Nobody else can see this happening, but I'm enraged. And suddenly the thought comes to me, have I learned nothing? God, you need to take this. You need to take this from me. She's on her way here. You need to take this from me. Excuse myself. I went into a side room, closed the door. I dropped to my knees and said, God, please remove this from me so I can be of use to my family. Please, God, do this for me. And I haven't got much time, God, so you got to work now. I got up, I walked out. My workmate, Michelle, was standing there. I told her, I just got a call from my daughter. She's got a bad brain thing going on. I'm going to go downstairs and meet her. You see the tenets of the program coming to fruition here? She said, are you okay? I said, I will be. And I walked out the door. And by the time I hit the bottom of the stairs, I had God's power and strength inside of me to handle this. She pulled up and poured out of the truck into my arms and sobbed her eyes out. And I held her so tight and whispered in her ear, it's going to be okay. Because I knew it was. That tumor grew. That tumor knocked her out of the game for a couple of years. This happened just pre-COVID. About 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, she got cleared. You guys showed up. She was on death's doorstep. There was no way that she was going to make it. She had an 8% mortality. They said she was not going to make it. This was about 2 years ago, and she battled. And you guys, if you bought shirts, t-shirts, sweatshirts, all through Zoom, people were flooding with the finances for something for Dana and all that kind of stuff. And it was like, I couldn't believe the love and the support outpouring from people like us who we believe are strangers, but we're really not. We talk like shit like this and we call ourselves strangers. I don't know any of you guys, but look at what I'm telling you. We don't talk about the weather or the Toronto Blue Jays. We talk about some real stuff here, right? So the point again I want to get back to is step 2 and step 10. Step 10. So I'm an understander that there is a God that hates my guts when I walk into step 2 at 14 years sober. And at 30 years sober, I'm falling on my knees before this God in absolute gratitude and absolute faithfulness. And I'm here for you, God, because you have never, ever not been there for me. And now it's this thing, like this 10th step, which is the most beautiful prospect of this entire program. This, it tells us in there is that the drink problem will leave us, man. It's a guarantee. It's not. So I came to Alcoholics Anonymous because drinking was the problem. And I found out, no, living's the problem. The drinking was the solution. And now this 10th step is the solution. That anytime anything crops up, I can make application of the specific directions in this 10th step, and I can have some form of relief enough that I can be of use to those around me, which is the only objective. I've never done this to feel better. I have never done this to feel better. I've only ever done this because when my ego gets strapped to a worldly clamor, I become useless to you. It's that simple. And if I become useless to you, the sunlight of the spirit gets shut off. And if the sunlight of the spirit gets shut off, I begin to get dark and very, very dark. And I begin to have conversations in my head like, screw AA, up yours, God, what have you ever done for me? And I start looking around the people in my life and start thinking about the lousy deal I'm getting from them. And my ego says, you're right. You're a great guy. After all you do for everybody, you shouldn't have to put up with their shit, And that's the dialogue going on in my head. But outside, I'm looking like this, I'm working, I'm doing all my stuff, But inside, that's the dialogue going on in my head. This 10th step is an ego buster. It unleashes an absolute, undeniable, powerful force, the only force that I think can overtake the ego. God's power, God's love, God's grace. The tenets of this step, the directions in this step give me access to those things, which unravel the ego. Sandy Beach, through a few conversations face to face, became one of the most prolific examples in my life of the power of this. No, the axiom in the 12 and 12 is not off the mark. It says, when I am disturbed, there's only ever anything wrong with me. And Sandy used to talk about this. He'd give weekend seminars on this topic, my disturbances. And is it not true that's sober now, no matter you got 1 year, 20 years, that you can still get hung up on your own clamors. You can still get hung up on your own issues in your life. Well, I say to my guys now, what if it be, this is from Sandy, what if it be that you had no problems? What if there actually were no problems? And some of you right now be saying, well, that's not really true. I mean, that's not how life goes. A problem is only a problem when we deem it so. Our thinking, our way of looking at life creates the nature of the problem that we believe is something that's happening to us, as opposed to something that's happening from us. And if you get underneath the perspective that it's a spiritual action, that anytime I am disturbed, it's because there is something wrong with me. And what is wrong with me? Well, I'm disturbed. That's what's wrong with me. And the only thing for me to do is to get undisturbed. And this process I just told you about works wonderfully for that. Calling your sponsor doesn't work for that. Not drinking and going to meetings doesn't work for that. Even reading a big book doesn't work for that. The directions in the big book and the 10-step work for that. I didn't have my big book with me when I was driving down the road and I got that news about my daughter. I didn't have the big book with me when I got the news at my desk. You know, I can't turn to the big book. The big book was never meant to be worshiped. It was meant to be, a textbook, get information from and follow the directions in our lives. He's never going to turn to the book because I'm going to turn to the book. The book is like the finger pointing to the power. Whereas Mark Houston used to say, you're not going to venerate the mule that takes you up to the summit. You're not going to turn and worship the mule. you're at the summit. You don't look at the vehicle that got you there. The idea here is that this power and presence in your life can be right now. Thanks for listening, guys. That's my talk on 2 and 10. And that's the link between 2 and 10. An unbeliever or a person who had an agnostic, an absolute agnostic, moving to this place where this trust and reliance on God, there is no life without it. And the testament is in my living life. It's not in my theoretical life. It's in the way I live. Yeah. Thanks for listening. Thanks so much.